Thank you for coming out. Our evening is called ARCANA, a dialogue. Before we get started, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this island and to celebrate as well on this island, to celebrate an event like this of what we're doing today and the project which we're going to talk about tonight. So welcome. I should point out, first of all, that we're missing two key people as part of this event. We're missing the person that came up with this project idea, Christine Davis, the artist. She unfortunately became ill this week, so she had to opt out. And Anna Kovler, who was also instrumental in getting this project off the ground. She's also not well this week, so it's just, I'm going to be moderating this discussion by myself, but I also have the help of Erica Biddle. Erica is going to be talking about some of the associations that we're doing with public. So I think what we should talk about first of all is, we're going to bring everybody up in short order, but Erica and I we're going to talk a little bit about some of the genesis of this project, how it came about, public's role in it, and most importantly, what's going to be coming out of this, the product itself, the books, which is the most exciting part, I think, of this collaboration between, this unique collaboration, I would say, between librarians and artists, something we've never tried before, and we're all, speaking for myself, we're all enjoying the process extraordinarily. We're really enjoying the process. So just a little bit about how this all came about. I met the artist Christine Davis through our student workers, Anna Kovler. Anna knew, one of the things I do here at the library is curate, along with some of the other librarians, our artist book collection, and she wanted me to meet some of the Toronto artists that work in the book arts. Christine Davis was one of them, so we went down to her studio just down the street at Huron Street, and showed me some of her books, and then we just got talking about all kinds of different things. We got talking about libraries, for example, the role of libraries in society. Then for some reason we got talking about Marshall McLuhan, and I'm not sure why McLuhan came up specifically, and I just mentioned offhandedly, oh, you know, by the way, you do know we have the complete working library of Marshall McLuhan at the Fisher Library, which she did not know about. And that kind of set some of the wheels in motion in terms of her thinking about, I wonder if we can compare some of the artists that I know with some of the librarians at the Fisher to look at our collections, to get the artists to absorb some of the collections, to think of ways about using our collections to create art. And what's come out of that is this series we're calling ARCANA. And it's an offshoot of Public, which I think Erica can talk about a little bit more about.
Yes, Public Access is a collective of artists, educators, writers, curators. It's been around since 1986. It's run out of York University. Public Access's Public Journal, which I have some issues over there. Public Books, which is going to be the home of ARCANA, or we'll be working on ARCANA, and Public Projects, which are very large public projects. And Public, as you'll see from this, Public Books just recently launched an imprint for artist books called Theorema Editions, and I've been brought on to work on that and on this project. And Theorema was kind of conceived as an ongoing project that's a collaboration between artists and archivists and artists and librarians.
So we hope this is only the beginning of the collaboration. Hopefully we can generate a lot of interest with these first 4 books that we're working on. And we can continue on with this series, working with other Fisher librarians and archivists and other artists, both in Toronto, in Canada, and in the US as well. It's something that we're very, very, very excited about. And the reason why we wanted to have this event tonight is sort of, the books are not ready. The collaborations are in various stages of completion. Which we'll find out as we go along with this dialogue. But what we wanted to do was introduce you to the participants in this project, both the librarians here at Fisher and the artists that we're working with. One of the librarians that is working with one of the artists is not unfortunately available with us tonight because she is on research leave, and I don't think she's in Toronto right now, so unfortunately she had to opt out, but we can still talk about her project because the artist who was working with her, Diane, basically worked with all different Fisher art librarians here. So so we can have a sort of a larger conversation about her project as well. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of, before we bring on the artists and the librarians?
Yes, I did want to say, and I do want to acknowledge the funding that this project has received from the Canada Council for the Arts, of the Arts, and the U of T Innovation Fund.
Yes, the Chief Librarian's Innovation Grant, which gave us a bit of seed money for to pay some of the artists. So I think with that, we're going to bring on the artists. So if the artists and the librarians can all come and join me, and sit with your librarian, if that's okay. We'll introduce everybody as we're going along. This is all very spontaneous and informal. We didn't plan too much in terms of the dialogue we're having, because we wanted it to be a real dialogue. We wanted it to have sort of a nice exchange between myself, between my artist, and all the different artists that we have here. So I think what we're going to do this in, why don't we do it in pairs, and I'll introduce each pair, and then we'll take the, I'll start sort of asking some of the pairs the questions. So why don't we start with Diane? So the reason why I'm starting with Diane is because she was the first one I met working at the Fisher for this project. So just to introduce Diane, and I apologize, Diane, I took this since Diane was supposed to, since Christine was supposed to be doing the artist introductions. I've had to take what I saw on your website as an introduction. So Diane Borsato is an artist that is shown at the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Power Plant, the AGYU, the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, the Walter Phillips Gallery at the Banff Centre for the Arts, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Owens Museum, the National Arts Centre, the Toronto Biennial Art and Galleries, and other museums internationally. Does that sound right? So far? In her project, she has worked closely with various other practitioners, including artists, dancers, and amateur naturalists, and now she can add librarians to that list.
Yes, that's great.
So as she's associate professor at the University of Guelph. She teaches advanced courses in experimental studio. She explores the relationships between art and everyday life, including food and art, special topics on walking, live art, and outdoor schools. So thank you, Diane, for coming to this tonight. And so Diane's the one to be working with Alexandra Carter, who unfortunately is not here with us tonight, but a couple of us have worked with Diane and could chat with you a little bit about your project as well. So maybe just to get us started off, how did you get initiated into this project?
Oh, you mean, I guess Anna invited me. I think she knew I'd been working on some book projects before,
Right.
And I'm not sure what she had in mind, but I was really so enthusiastic to come.
Had you been to our library before?
I hadn't, I'm embarrassed to say. So this was a really wonderful way to initiate me into learning how to use the library and make some relationships and and have hands-on experience with the materials here, which meant a lot.
I assume you had no precept whatsoever in terms of coming into this library and thinking, okay, I'm going to do work on this particular project.
No, I'm embarrassed to say that, but I think this introduction means I might just keep working here forever. It's an amazing, pardon? Oh, it's an amazing resource.
Yeah.
Okay, forgive me. Maybe is it better if I really project? Okay, I'll use a theater voice. There are no mics.
I think it's recording with the audio. I think
okay.
so, but I don't think it's recording with the. So I apologize for that. We'll try to speak loud. We'll carry our theater voices with us. So when you first came into the library, what was your initial thought about what you were going to do? Because I mean, eventually, your project you settled on was snakes. So
one word.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very opaque situation, this library. I'm not sure how many of you have experience doing research here, but you're not actually allowed to go up into the stacks and pull out the books. And so there are a number of operations before you can actually see a book, and you have to plan in advance, like the day before, and fill out forms, and you have to know what you're looking for before you've seen anything. And so, there's a lot of kind of friction before you have books in your hands. And so I think that was a pretty intimidating beginning. And I decided to sort of go with the fact the place was a kind of like a dark forest. It was a wilderness, full of mysteries. And so I decided I would use some of the skills I've been working with in a literal forest, picking one object of study like a mushroom, and then just saying, okay, I'm going to look for one thing in the entire place and follow this path across all the different categories of knowledge, and see what is revealed, like see what surprises come up, and just sort of go on a collecting mission and then try and make sense of everything I find. So I decided to pick snakes. I thought there would be representations of snakes in the library, and I found snakes, once I started, everywhere. I mean, obviously in zoology and field guides and science books, but there are snakes in cookbooks and travel books and children's literature, and snakes in Bibles and in sport books and taxidermy and gay pulp fiction. I found snakes everywhere, and so it was sort of a way for me to access and have a relationship with and learn about the whole place.
In terms of, maybe talk about then a couple of books then that you used in this project, specifically the one that we're using for the poster,
sure.
with the one with your hands. That's one I think
That's
that David Fernández
David can talk
introduced you
about.
to.
Yeah, David showed it to me. What are they bound with? Because it occurred to me that the library's full of animals too. They're all bound in animal skins.
Inside and outside the books.
Yeah.
So the particular book that we're talking about is one that is part of a large collection or encyclopedia published in Bologna and other parts of Italy in the 17th century. This particular edition is the first of Aldrovandi book of serpents and dragons. And it's a beautiful follow edition bound in vellum or animal skin, like calf, for example. And it's treated in a particular way, and it has a very specific look that you'll see everywhere in the library. And the images in it are an important part of the narrative of the book. So these are woodcut illustrations that if you were to go or visit the Museo Aldrovandi in Bologna, you would see a lot of the original woodcuts that have been preserved, and they were originally used for that particular book. That book was part of an exhibition I curated a few years on monsters, and that's why I know a little bit about Aldrovandi, but also in my work as a librarian, I specialize in Latin America, and a lot of the work I do is around colonial history. And natural history has always been an interest of mine. And that book, it's one of those that when people ask, what's your favorite book? I often cite that among many, many others.
Yeah, I think when you showed me those books first, it occurred to me how many, the snake, as we know, snake, like this category is much looser in this library. There's dragon-like snakes and furry snakes and monstrous amphibian, there's all kinds of magical snakes, and so that was already a really interesting kind of thing to discover, that our contemporary categories are very different from everything else here.
They're even part of design. So we have in the Victorian Natural History collection, you probably saw some of the cloth bindings that reproduce the pattern of different skins, including snake skins. So we have some of those 19th century patterns that would have been printed or produced on cloth. So if you haven't seen those, I'd be more than happy to show you more snakes.
Yeah, I could just spend the rest of my life looking for snakes here, probably. It's just unlimited, but fascinating, yeah. Should I mention a couple more?
What other books do you pull out then?
So
you get a chance to look at this material after we finish our dialogue.
So another thing I noticed about snakes is they don't have a good reputation in this library. I pulled out just for tonight a quote by Carl Linnaeus writing about amphibians and reptiles, and he describes their doubtful lungs and double penis. They're abhorrent because of their cold body, pale color, cartilaginous skeleton, filthy skin, fierce aspect, calculating eye, offensive smell, harsh voice, squalid habitation, and terrible venom. And there were a lot of scary representations of snakes. Certainly they were representing in Bibles like the devil and a punishing demon in hell. And I also found that they were associated with people. I have an example of a travel album, which maybe I'll let the librarians describe, where representations of people in India, in the Middle East are, there's a picture of snake charmers, so it's a kind of album that you would use to sell to people on a cruise as a souvenir. And I also found a snake. I looked as hard as I could. I had to find a snake in gay pulp fiction, and I found one on the cover of a book. A man has a big snake tattoo, so, associated with some transgressive sexuality in that case. Yeah, there's snake cookbooks, and I'm not sure what else. Oh, I also pulled out a book from the medical collection, and Alex, who's the librarian of this section, said she'd never seen it before. It is the weirdest image of a heart, like completely anatomically imagined, nothing related to how we see a heart right now. And it's a story about a serpent in the heart of a man who's 21 years old. His name is, I think, John Bennett. And so there's a picture of this parasite or worm in a very strange looking heart. So you can see that too. And maybe if one of us opens it for you, there's also a weird pullout that you have to see. But yeah, strange and marvelous diversity of images.
Did you get a sense of how many books you actually looked at over your period here?
I'm not sure how many books. I came 7 or 8 times, and that's such a superficial, collection. It's just a small sample, right? But I think of it like a foray. I just sort of pull a sample and then see the stories that I've collected, and as a kind of portrait, less of snakes and more of the stories we write on them, and the biases and the unique perspectives of this library.
In terms of your collaboration with Alex, then, I mean, what is the nature of that? What is Alex bringing to the project as well?
Alex,
that's exciting.
I can say everything again. Don't worry. I guess I've enlisted any librarian I could get my hands on every time I came, and I found
spoke to all of us.
And I found every librarian, because the catalog doesn't tell you about images, so I would have to look up titles I thought might, I had long lists of search terms, and I would try and find books that I might find an image of a snake and flip through them all. So it was very, very hands-on. So every librarian had at least one snake in them. They knew of there was one librarian who knew about a snake skin bookmark in a volume, and he knew the call number by heart. Wow. And so I found that really wonderful, because I never would have found, I never would have thought of looking in Paradise Lost, and then I found images, or looking in a book from children's literature about the desert, and then I found, so the librarians knew about snakes, and ongoing would sort of keep track of them for me. Alex was really helpful in her area of science and medicine, and also for the book she's writing about some of the volumes from the librarian's perspective, because I'm not an expert at any of the books, I've just looked at the pictures. And so in the book, I have my kind of artist's outsider, superficial, projections, and she writes about the volumes from expert perspective.
Great. Well, we look forward to that project.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add about it in terms of any of the books you wanted? Or
no, that's fine.
Perfect. Well, we're definitely looking forward to that. As we said, I can't remember if we said at the start. The books are going to be available in the fall. So we're working on them now. Erica is going to be doing a big chunk of the editing in March and April, and then our wonderful designer, Allison Hahn, who's also here this evening, will be doing the book design. So those will be ready by, I think we're scheduled for October, maybe? October, November? I can't remember exactly. Okay, perfect. Erica's nodding yes. So look for those. We're going to turn next now to my colleague Grant Hurley and Maria Hupfield. And Maria, I apologize again. I took from your website a little bio of you. I hope it was up to date.
Me too.
So Maria Hupfield is an assistant professor of Indigenous Digital Arts and Performance and a Canadian Research Chair in Transdisciplinary Indigenous Arts. So far, so good? Okay, good. An alumni of UTM, she has been at the cutting edge of art and public engagement for many years, from her early works as founder of 7th Generation Image Makers, Native Child and Family Services of Toronto, forging partnerships with the Art Gallery of Ontario, Charles Street Video, an imaginative film and media arts festival, and the Toronto Indigenous community to recent collaborative performances with musicians and artists, including the commission of 5 multimedia projects for Toronto's Nuit Blanche in 2017. And then you now can add a collaboration with a librarian. So, my colleague Grant Hurley is the Canadiana specialist here at the Fisher. He's been here for 2 years? Almost 2 years now. It's been a great addition since we were terribly lacking in a Canadiana librarian for at least 10 years. So Grant, there's a lot of work for Grant to do at this library. So a lot of stuff that was being sort of left dormant. And so Grant is very capably filling that hole for us. So actually, I'll start with you, Maria. So how did you get initiated into this project?
So I received a mysterious email inviting me to take part, and I had recently just finished another book project, so books were on my mind. And I thought, wow, what, you want me to come into this library and I can do whatever I want? Absolutely, count me in. So here I am.
Good. And Grant were you immediately paired with Grant, I wonder, or was that sort of, do you remember Grant?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, they kind of initially asked, you know, what are you working on? What do you have on your mind? Let's pair you up.
Right.
And I'm more of the type of artist where I'm like, well, what's possible? What's in this collection?
Right.
And I think it was through, you know, just kind of having conversations and thinking about things. And then I showed up and Grant was here and he had a curated selection of books that he brought out, custom for me.
Wow.
He said, I read your bio, I know your work, I've learned about your work, so here's some books that may be of interest.
And were they?
Oh my gosh, just so many amazing things, and things I wouldn't have even thought of. So for example, I didn't know the library would be a place where we would find, it was a wampum belt, so another form of literacy or literature, you know, through shells, right, that have been woven together. So all kinds of things. Yeah, it was a real adventure. There was like something with a book in it, but we couldn't get to the book.
Oh,
It was like all kinds of crazy things that just blew my mind and made me think, oh wow, I thought I knew what a book was.
Okay.
But
Do you remember the books you brought up? Do you remember how you curated that collection for Maria?
Yeah, I mean, it was an initial just selection of cool things to try and impress you. And so what was there? We have a book of needlework, basically, that someone had sewn directly into the pages, because I know you've done a lot of work with fabric and performance around fabric. So, and another in which it's actually really a sculpture.
Right.
It's a felted set of hands that's holding a book.
Right.
Which is a little bit creepy, but
it's felt.
But very, it's felt related. But the topic that we actually came to didn't come until a little bit later, right? Like it was a bit more of a back and forth process. But you came with a story, really, that initiated it all. I don't know if you're interested in telling that, but.
Yeah. You want me, I can tell the story.
Yeah, do you want to tell the story?
Well, so I knew snakes were already taken, right? And we have a lot of stories about snakes as well, because when we're thinking about being from a place, I'm originally, my family's from an island, so water figures heavily into that. And so the water, you know, the Manitou, the spirit that's there is like the creature whose name we do not speak of, the underwater panther. So a lot of snakes. So I was, but the story that kind of connected was I had a studio visit with this fantastic curator, Heather Atone. And at the end of the studio visit, she gifted me this gorgeous print that she made. And it had an image of a swan. And the swan, I remember her telling me, was right at the horizon. And she said, the thing about swans is that they're pretty special, because when they fly, they don't, you know, they can go in the air and the water, but when they fly, they're right at the horizon. They're in between. And so, yeah, that really struck me. And then she went on to say that, you know, because I'm Anishinaabe, she said, well, your people think of the eagle. So you think of, you know, in the sky, a certain kind of bird. But that her husband's nation really looked to the swan. Right. And for those reasons, that there's a lot there around this animal. I was like, wow, from another nation. I have no, it was all new to me. So she left, and then I think like the next day I got a call. She was going to the airport, and the Sally Frater who brought her was, saying, we're in the car. And I said, well, please tell Heather thank you, and let her know she couldn't have known this, but my name in Anishinaabe is Wabazikwe, and Wabazi is a word that also means swan. And so that's kind of how I came to it, because I realized, if I'm trying to find and locate myself in returning back here to Toronto after living in Brooklyn, I've only been here since 2019, then I really want to be at home in this library, in this space. So I thought, I want to know all these stories about the origin of the swan. Let's see what we can uncover.
And what did you uncover, Grant? To put you on the spot?
I mean, the process is very similar to, I think, what Dan was describing, in which you're really going with initial breadcrumbs. I don't know if that's too close to the swan. Maybe it's feeding swans breadcrumbs, but following passive association, really. And so we both, Marie and I, kind of met and started just talking about what we knew about swans, really.
Yeah.
And I was working with my associations of the swan, things that I knew or had thought about, and you came with your own, right, stories, in particular interest in fairy tales that feature the swan. And the more we started looking, the more we found, really. Like you could,
once you start talking about swans, you see them everywhere.
Yeah.
And around Christmas time, I was like, oh, 7 swans are swimming, We're thinking that not all kinds, Swan Lake, everything.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's similar to the snake, I think. The swan is another very culturally laden animal. Particularly, I'm talking about Western cultures, where if you start thinking about where you've seen swans in stories and in mythology and in cultural references like the Black Swan or the Swan Song, suddenly you just start working with this panoply of source material. And so I sent an initial email sort of like, okay, here's everything I could find about swans on a first pass. And so that included things like Leda and the Swan, right? And for that, we have a woodcut from 1546 depicting Leda and the Swan, right? The classical myth. But we also have the first printing of Yeats's poem of the same name, right? And so these two items are suddenly, they're in conversation and have been over the centuries, right? In a similar mode, too, of course, there's biological texts that depict the swan, swan anatomy, swan behavior, and so there's that perspective on the swan as well. But I think you've also been very generous in bringing in indigenous knowledge about the swan, and so its name, I think, is really evocative of, as well, like the way the word Wabazi and what that means, I think, is fascinating. So,
yeah. So, I mean, how amazing to discover that there are 2 dictionaries here with Anishinaabe language. One where you can translate from Anishinaabe into English, and the other where you can go English into Anishinaabe. I prefer the Anishinaabe because they really give a good breakdown. So you'll see words like Wabazi, and then you'll see other words with the same root. So a word like Wabazi, it's a word we use for a swan, but it's also used for a color that's so shiny and bright that you might think of it as white, or it might be used for silver. So there's a lot of other kinds of connections. But yeah, it was really incredible to make some of I felt like we were on a adventure of finding things. And the types of things that were resonating, that story about I read this crazy story about, what was it, the 6 brothers who turned into swans, and the sister had to make them a vest and then throw it over their heads so that they could then become her brothers again. So I'm like, why is it a vest? Why is it a textile? And then that took me back to, thinking about the value of textiles as materials, relations to animals, why are they turning into swans, where's that coming from? There was so many decoding that was happening. But also, as much as there is so much here, there's also a lot that isn't. And so realizing that there's a certain kind of history that is included, which then brought us to the thinking that, well, perhaps if there are stories that are meant to be oral traditions and not necessarily written down, then perhaps the way to go forward would be to invite a couple of people to also contribute. So I've reached out to a poet, Nicole Wallace, who works at the Poetry Project in New York, and she's coming up with something. She's lovely because she works with Anishinaabe-Moin, so she's going to use language, is my hope. Yeah, so we've had some, and I'm doing a few drawings as well. So.
In terms of the books you put out today, can you want to talk about what?
I picked a few just very small samples, really, but one of them is a 16th century manuscript on astronomy, so it's depicting the Cygnus constellation in the sky. So if you want to look up and see what that looks like, take a look at that book. What else? We've got Darwin's on the expression of emotions in animals.
The one that he
So we have
made
two. Yeah, we've got
the
a
page-proof
annotated proof copy of that book, so annotated by Darwin himself.
The angry
so,
swan.
Yeah, but there's a woodcut in it of an angry swan, expressing its displeasure at having had its nest disturbed. And so even though that's, it's coming from that more biological description perspective, I guess, I mean, the association with Darwin can't really be beat, so. And of course, we have a copy of Grimm's Fairy Tales as well. But yeah, to me, I think the swan as a figure, I love that aspect of its transitional nature, its in-betweenness. There's something about the way that the swan is described across many cultures, I think, where that neither of one place nor the other is very important. And one of those aspects is sort of neither of the living nor the dead, right? And that's why that sort of term swan song exists, because, you know, the swan is singing its most beautiful thing at the moment of its death, right? It's this in-between state. And, you know, I think of the work of librarians really as being primarily attending to the words of the dead, right? We look up every day, we see these books that hold these voices that belong to mostly people who've passed away, right? That certainly includes voices of those living too. But the thing that's been really struck me about this project is, okay, you know, most of the time I'm thinking about human creators, authors, people depicted in books, perhaps even the people who made the books, but very rarely about the animals. So how do we attend to the life of an animal, right? That's no longer with us as well. And so thinking about what that means in relation to the library, and I think snakes would sort of equally apply here as well. You know, prolonging our understanding of their lives, and perhaps even on their own terms, right? So,
yeah, on their own terms. Really trying to realizing a lot of what we come to think of and understand about swans is from people, right? And what we think of swans, but not what swans think of themselves or how they live and work. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's one story, maybe if we have time, I can tell it, that sort of really struck me. I was just doing some writing for the book on Tuesday, and I came across an essay where it was a persistent issue up until recently that swans on their migration patterns from the north to the southern states in America would pause in the Niagara River frequently for a rest and be swept over Niagara Falls. And so this has been documented quite a bit. There's many sources here at the library that talk about this event. Very tragic. If you want to talk about swan song, like that's it. But there's an essayist whose collection actually also belongs here, talking about this event and observing swans going over the falls, and some of them surviving and flying back up. And to me, that kind of persistence and that sort of resistance is getting towards something about the life of the swan on its own terms, you know,
Looking forward to this collaboration. So how far along are you on the project, out of curiosity?
Pretty good, I'd say.
Yeah, we've got a lot of content. We're trying to figure out how to fit it into the page count, so.
Right. Great, well, we look forward to it. So thank you. I'm gonna skip over Thyrza. We're gonna be last.
Okay.
So we're gonna go to the two at the end. So Jarrett Earnest and my colleague Debbie Fernández. So Jarrett, I will introduce you. I have you down as a visual artist, writer, curator, educator.
There's a lot more to
A lot more. Interesting enough, actually, Jarrett is the first person I met as part of this project outside of the library, because he was here, I guess it was it 2 years ago when you were here for Devotion, which was one of the publications we had. And it was funny because I came home after I met Jarrett, and I opened the New York Review of Books, and there was an article by you. It was like, wow, So I suddenly met, it's sort of like serendipity. Suddenly I'm meeting this guy that
The
I'm
goddess
reading
was
about.
giving you a sign.
Exactly, the gods
Work
were giving
with
us a
me.
sign. Yes, exactly. So I'm not going to go through Jarrett's whole CV, if that's
Thank you.
okay. So, but as I said, that's how I met Jarrett, and I think Jarrett and David is the head of rare books and special collections here at the library. And I should add, he's really been instrumental in getting this project off the ground as well. As I said, it started from initial conversation that Christine and I and Anna had, but then we brought Christine here, and David just glommed right onto it. So wouldn't you say that was one of those things you were just, because you saw the possibilities, I think, of collaborations between artists and between librarians. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that as well. But David is head of rare books and special collections here, and I guess you guys met fairly when you were here.
We met at the same time
At the
that
same
you
Yep.
met with Christine. And I would say that our story is kind of different working together than other people's,
Right.
because it was a little more like a love affair,
Okay.
like most things in my life. So basically, we were put in touch because we were both people with a certain sensibility, a set of interests, and I heard that there was a really great queer archive collection here, and that this was something that David in particular was engaged with. And so very dutifully, you were showing me, like, here's the pulp books, here's this, and you were very great, but you also seemed a little bored. And so I was like, could you just tell me, like, what you really care about here? Like, what's the thing that you are responsible for bringing into this situation? And, like, your whole body changed, and you started pulling out this incredible shit. And one of which was this little book, which before Arcana was a glimmer in Christine Davis's eye, this was a little bit for me like the seed of this project, was you brought out this little book and showed it to me, and I thought, this is one of the great treasures. And I didn't know anything about the person who made it or anything of what that you were telling me about it, and you said that indeed there's very few people do know about this. So would you explain what that book is that you showed me, which is actually on display on that table? You can look at it later.
Yes, it's over there. So the book that I showed is an album of illustrations produced by Álvaro Retana in 1940, between 1940 and 1941, at a time when he was in prison in La Madrileña, a prison that doesn't exist anymore in Madrid. And this is the only manuscript that we have in the collection by Álvaro Retana. And so it's 2 volumes bound by him, created by him, with these beautiful silk covers and even more beautiful illustrations of elegant costumes from the 18th century, all created and imagined by Retana, you know, during one of the most difficult times in his life. Yeah. So that's what it is.
And so when this project evolved, there was the idea that we would work together, and I was like, can't we just do a book about that? And one of the things that we've done with Retana, who was kind of described to me, and you can correct this, is very little translated into English, very little English language scholarship, and why didn't I know about the Spanish Oscar Wilde? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of my thing. So one of the opportunities that we used this for was to translate one of his novellas, and which you see the cover of over there. The physical book is there, and we had it translated by a great poet named Kimberly Krug, and I wanted to read just a paragraph from it, of this new translation that arrived, just to give you a sense of like what's the material we're talking about. The setup is that Álvaro Retana, infamously decadent, a libertine author, corrupter of youth, finds himself on a train with a mother, a very beautiful Brazilian mother who's an opera singer, and her 2 teenage identical twin children who are unbelievably beautiful. And one of whom, and their favorite writer happens to be Álvaro Retana, whom he pretends not to be. And there's like a boy twin and a girl twin, and they're sort of become friendly with him anyways. So this is the scene. The mother and the girl are sleeping together on one side of the train car, and then the boy, whose name is Tito, or Robertito, is, you know, talking to him at night, like wakes up and says like, hey, like, are you awake? And he's like, I'm awake. And he's like, I'm awake too, can we talk? Also, I'm cold, can we like cuddle together? And he says, okay, come over here. And so this is this passage. Oh, and by the way, Ratana is also like playing it down the whole time. He's like not being himself, and also like, I'm a moral lawyer. You know what I mean? I certainly am not trying to seduce you. And that sustains through the entire story. Seeing that he says, will you tell me about your loves? And Ratana says, seeing that I didn't say anything interesting, Tito, with a demonic crassness, yet without losing the angelic sweetness in his eyes, revealed his misdeeds, which could have appeared in the most aberrant of my novels. In the Argentine Republic, Tito loved the perfume of decadence, and many nights he escaped to the far-flung neighborhoods of South America's large cities, seeking an ill-advised escape to quell the anxieties of a precociously perverted boy. While his mother delighted audiences from the stage, he ran to the outskirts to be honored by seekers of deviant lust, for whom his confident adolescence was an irresistible temptation. The handsome young man fanned monstrous desires, and he savored the strange grandeur of seeing himself courted and sought after like any other priest of pleasure. But he never decided to give himself up. While he was morally prostituted, he fiercely guarded his corporeal virginity. He was like a lily that had grown voluntarily in the mud, only defiled by glances or words. Beneath the appearance of a naive, harmless angel, Tito hid a depraved and suggestive soul, intrepid and curious, resulting from a poorly directed education and the cosmopolitan relaxedness around customs. Civilization's poison of ill-advised adventures no longer scandalized anyone because, among other reasons, the world forgives everything except that which might bore people. Now I understand, he concluded, without losing the beatific expression in his glazed eyes, or now you understand how happy I might have been to share my knowledge with Alvaro Ratana. I am a boy for him. If only he could hear me, he might turn the novel of my life into a formidable book. Imagine the things I could tell him. So, you know, it goes on from there. So I wanted to know, what was it about this material, he also wrote this in 1923, in which, was he also 23 years old? He is in the book, no?
No, he wasn't. So I can tell you a little bit about Ratana, a lot. But I just wanted to ask the question, before today, who knew about Alvaro Ratana? Just raise your hand. See, nobody. Right? And a lot of work has been done in recent decades, particularly in Spain, to recover his identity and his legacy from total historical erasure. For me, I was introduced by Ratana by a faculty member here at U of T in my undergraduate years. I have a picture of one of the books that we have here. And after that, I just became so enthralled with the story of you know, this creative force in the early 20th century in Spain, and I wanted to know more about it. And I realized that the only way I could learn about him was to collect his books. So this started as a personal interest. In my first trip to Spain, I forget when, 2015 maybe, I dragged my partner through Seville, Barcelona, Madrid, through bookstores looking for copies of Ratana. And I came back with dozens of books that I had at home, and I began learning about Ratana, the person, the individual behind the books. I was not so much interested in the content of his writing, but more about what he was revealing and not revealing about himself in the paratext. So in the introductions, and because I saw how contradictory they were to the actual text. So to escape censorship, the interviews that serve in many cases as introductions, or the introductions that he writes for many of his novels. He wrote over 100 novellas. In many cases contradict. They say this stories are not real. I don't approve of this behavior. This doesn't reflect my own identity. I'm just, writing for an audience who's eager to read this text. He sounds very much like that in Spanish. And so the translator has done a beautiful work in capturing his prose, a prose that is decadent. He uses the word frivolous, frivolidad, to talk about sexuality, to talk about gender, to talk about non-binary bodies, or bodies that challenge, especially at that time, conceptions about who we are as sexual beings. So yeah.
Well, also, one of the things that's so great about this novella is it's this shell game of persona, because he's like, the idea is this beautiful, decadent teenager is like desperate for this guy to like use and abuse him and show him all the perversity that he possibly can. And he's saying like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not like that. You know what I mean? Like, that's just my persona. And then the end of the book is this moral tale where it's like, oh, he reveals his true identity, and then the relationship kind of falls apart, and then years later he sees the sister, and the sister says, oh yes, he did go down this corrupt path, and then he killed himself and he's dead. And then Ratana's like, oh no, my boyfriend, I missed him. He was so beautiful. What a shame. And so it has this kind of fake morality at the end that's almost like the conclusion of a Douglas Sirk film, where it's like, oh, okay, this is an end that is like supposed to be teaching you something, but it's actually like expressing your desire for exactly the opposite thing that it's telling you is like the right thing to do. And it's like, it feels shockingly contemporary, this story. Even the language is so great. It's like Kathy Acker or something, where it's just like performance. Even the introduction is so great, written by a friend. Or is it actually him who wrote that, or is it a real person?
No, him interviewing himself, or Artemio Preciado, I think is. Yeah. So that's an actual person in this case.
But it has a preface that's this guy saying, oh, I ran into Ratana having lunch with all these glamorous people, and I said, I'm going to interview tomorrow for the introduction to your new book. And he said, no need, I don't want an introduction. This book is so profoundly autobiographical, it doesn't need an introduction. And in fact, will you just tell all these beautiful young people to stop coming to my house at all hours of the day and asking for my autograph? If they can at least tell me they're going to come in advance, I'd be happy to do anything for them. Also, when they send me fan mail, please tell them to include a self-addressed stamped envelope, because I'm so tired of spending so much money responding to the letters of these, ill-gotten youth. And it's like so funny, because it is like this thing which the signal is in neon lights, hey, fags, like you can come and find me, and like we find each other. Like this is a sign that I'm making for you to hold up in this coded way, but it's all done through disavowal. Like, I don't want any of this. I don't want all this glamour around me all the time. And it is so funny. And I kind of was like shocked reading it, where I was like, wait, why doesn't anyone know about this? So what do you think? What is the scenario around the infelicities of its translation or its traveling into North America?
Well, it starts in what happened to him in Spain. Retana was born in 1890, but we only found out his real birth date much later, because, as you say, everything about him is ambivalent or contradictory. He was very famous or very popular up to the 1920s and 1930s, and his book circulated in great volumes. He's part of the Silver Age, so this is an important print culture in Spain that saw mass market publication, not like we see later in the millions in the 1960s in North America with pulps, but that's the equivalent in Spain, where you have authors like Retana and many others taking advantage of this moment in history where they could produce short novels, short stories, short theater pieces, and get them published in these large runs and as part of collections of, theater, of, Género Chico is one of them. And so what happened is, during the time he's popular, but after his death in 1970, and of course throughout the Franco regime, he was just erased from history. And literary scholars in Spain did not pay attention to Retana until the 1980s, and it's until 1994 when Luis de Villena publishes a biography on Retana that we begin to see a resurgence of interest around this figure. But by that point, many of the people that knew Retana and a lot of the original material hadn't survived, or we thought was lost. And so that had an effect on how late Retana has made it into scholarship in English and in other languages. There's some work done in Brazil on Retana, or in Germany as well, but also in the United States and in Britain. But that's more recent, since the 2000s. His archives are dispersed, and I only found out this week. There's a new book that just came out in February about Retana resisting the Franco regime, that finally puts together or brings, an important piece of evidence or great news that his archive, or part of his archive, actually survived. And there with his son, he had a son with one of the experimental marriages that he had, as he called it. And so now we know that there's, a batch of material that survived, and hopefully more people will work on him to recover, his almost lost legacy.
Maybe you could talk a little bit, just to end, about how, because we talked about this as well, about the librarian part of the collaboration here, because that really started from the ground up, from when we were talking, those early conversations 2 years ago. And maybe you could talk a little bit about, as a whole, this project as a whole, but also your particular project with Jarrett.
Well, for me, it has been a great lesson on applying ideas around bibliography, particularly queer bibliography, which the aim is to recover queer past. And Retana is one of those case studies that deserves a lot of attention. He was not only an author, a pornographer, he was also an illustrator, and we have an example of that. And so, for me as a librarian, it's been a great opportunity to connect the collection with others, not just researchers, but with creators who can help us advance our goal of preserving cultural heritage, especially around topics that in the past and till the present have been neglected or have not been prioritized. And I think some of the examples, or all the examples that we're working, fit really well into that. A practice that is committed to ensuring that what we refer to as rare and special includes everything or everyone. And it's not just this exclusive and elitist idea of what deserves to be here and what deserves to have the attention of artists and librarians and archivists.
But I think, I really honor librarians and people who know stuff, because I don't know much, but I do know certain things, which is I really like, I edit books. I put together a lot of books, books of people's, especially artists writing, but things that I think are important. And part of what I think doing a book project is about loving something. Yeah. And to say, I love this thing. Let me articulate in public why this is something that you should love. And I think that that is what scholarship at its highest form should be. That's what I think all kinds of intellectual and cultural practice should be, techniques of loving in public. And I think the Ratana work is so beautiful in that sense, which it's like, okay, I had no idea. The guy edited a book of the history of frivolity. And I've spent, you know, this week writing about doing a studio visit with the French photographers Pierre et Gilles, which also did mass, as many of you might know, like kind of mass circulated, very silly images, and then thinking, oh, this is an extension of a lineage of queer resistance. This isn't just like kiki, look, I put glitter on everything. It is that, and I never want to let go of that part of it. But it's also like a larger story that we might have intuited, but don't usually find ourselves in a position to go into a library like this and find. And so my real belief in this ARCANA project, and in this Ratana volume in particular, is to stimulate other people doing more translations of this work, doing more scholarship on this book, looking at these drawings. The paintings are so beautiful. When you showed them to me, I was like, I can't believe this. Like, what, this guy was in prison and he was doing frilly paintings of dresses, you know, out of nothing. So that's my response to working with the library. So yeah, that's why I said it's a love affair.
It is.
Well, it's great. We're looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to reading the translation. It sounds amazing.
It's
Yeah,
juicy.
Juicy, good stuff. So we're going to move to the last project, which is one I've been working on with my colleague here, Thyrza Nichols Goodeve. I took your bio from Wikipedia.
Good luck. Yeah.
So she is a writer, interviewer, artist, and teacher, active in the field of contemporary art and culture, and you're based in Brooklyn. You are known both as an essayist and an innovator, and you write on diverse topics ranging from vaudeville to Sidebergs to the art of doodling, which was interesting when I saw that, because our project is very tied a little bit to the idea of doodling. So Thyrza and I are working with the library of Marshall McLuhan that we have here at the Fisher Library. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you were brought into the project.
First of all, what an extraordinary, right? All of this original research, which is what's incredible. And I love the fact I'm following you, because McLuhan is the opposite, right? McLuhan is, everybody knows who he is or has heard his name, especially in Canada. So I was invited by, I know Christine, I live in New York, and Christine and I are friends, and she has a sixth sense and knew that this was a project I would love. And it has transformed me and made me quite aware of how McLuhan has been misrepresented, right? He is an original mind. He is a poetic thinker. He is so generative, and he even talks like this. And the reason I'm saying that is because there was a point in my life, but please don't hold it against me, that I was in academia. And in academia, there's a little bit of a, about McLuhan, because maybe he is not so systematic or whatever. And oh my goodness, I just am now feeling that is just the wrong way to go about looking at him. I mean, first of all, he invented this idea of writing the mosaic. He was doing, his first book was in 1951 called The Mechanical Bride. And he did it as a kind of collage mosaic book, right? So here was this opportunity to go and see his books that he read. And he was a big annotator, and I love annotation. I think of it as like a form of drawing. John had said something quite smart, which was really the Marshall McLuhan's medium was the book, right? So and you had talked about how there have been no biographies at this point that have used this yet. And it's a gold mine because, these are just a selection that happened to be left over from this morning when I was working here. But you'll see that you can tell if he likes the book or if he's read it, because you open the back and you'll see meticulous notes. He's a very efficient reader. He does not, you look at a book I've annotated, and it's just all over every page, and he's very, he picks and chooses, and he writes these tiny little phrases that are extremely poetic. And one of my fascinations, too, was that he talks about that the medium as the message came to him from reading St. Thomas Aquinas. And I was just like, wow, I don't come from that tradition. And so it was so great to be able to go in and see where, like, there's a little moment, I don't have it up here, I'm sorry, but, where you'll see in this collection of Aquinas, him writing in, these very modern and almost now sort of cliches that people don't even think about, right? And so there was so much pleasure. And the other thing I do want to say, I've only been here since Monday.
Yeah, I first met Thyrza on Saturday.
So we're
our collaboration
not at all
our collaboration is still in its embryonic state.
Exactly, but we've had, it's
Yes.
just been like going through the stacks, because here I've been able to be in the stacks, pull out his books, look at them, and there's one that's there that I found that's about the history of smell, or it's a better title than that. And all of the things that he gets out of it, you'll see. And there are these little, again, just what he sees. Or a biography of Helen Keller. This is one of my favorites. I found a couple of books that he read that were biographies of blind people.
It wasn't her memoir?
It wasn't her memoir. It was actually just written about her. But in the back, all of these, beautiful, I can't really recall them. I have them on my phone, but I'm putting them on my Instagram if you want to see. Where, talking about what silence means to her. And everything he read was through his extraordinarily original mind. That's the thing I came to. This guy is an original. And we knew that, but he's been seen more as a kind of like 60s clown, kind of Timothy Leary. Like, everybody knows him from what? The Woody Allen, right? So that's the impression that you have of him.
And just to provide a bit of context into the library itself, so we acquired the library from his estate in 2016, 2017 period, and basically what you have is a complete working library. And it's great when I show portions of that library in classroom settings because, first of all, a lot of people might not know. Students these days might have heard of McLuhan, but then when you say something like, oh, have you heard the phrase, the medium is the message? Or if you hear the phrase, the global village, they'll say, oh yeah, that sort of sounds familiar. And then you explain he was a longtime professor here at the University of Toronto, didn't even start out as a communication theorist, he was an English prof. His touchstones, which you see also in his library, are authors like James Joyce or T.S. Eliot. I mean, those are the people that he revered really throughout his whole life. And one of his most famous books that we have, the McLuhan books we have here, is his copy of one of his copies of Finnegan's Wake. There's 5 or 6 copies of Finnegan's Wake, largely because it was so heavily annotated, he needed another copy. He also claimed, weirdly, to have cracked the code of Finnegan's Wake, whatever that means.
I would believe it, if
yes.
anybody can, because if you see the way he read it and how many times he read it, and then you read through anything else, and it's always Joyce, Joyce, Joyce. He's also associating it with.
But the great thing about the library, which I think you've discovered as well, is the depth and breadth of it. And he's reading things that you might be surprised. He's reading, obviously he's reading Aquinas, he's reading Joyce, but he's reading contemporary books of his time, like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's just kind of fascinating to see the types of materials that he's drawing upon for his own research, for his own writings. He had such an active mind, and I think it's been a pleasure for me, actually, going back into that McLuhan library. I've sort of been responsible for the McLuhan library for the last couple of years. Haven't really delved into it as much as I have over this past week. and it's been such a joy hanging out in the stacks.
Oh, and we're just like, oh
Yeah,
my God,
oh my
look
God,
at this, and look what he
it's like-
said, and
exactly.
oh my gosh, yeah.
So even things like, oh, there's 2 copies of Alice in Wonderland. One of the copies was gifted to him from his father, for
Yeah,
example.
exactly.
And you talked a little bit, you read a little bit about his relationship with his father, and you finding a copy of Death of a Salesman. So, which
And his father was a
salesman.
salesman for a moment, and his father, how do we put it? He was not respected. He didn't really respect his father, and his wife was an elocutionist and a performer, and she had a very strong personality, and he followed her. And she even came to England when he was there and all of that. And the father sort of put away, and he's kind of almost embarrassed about him in a way, I guess, is the way. This is from a biography. And so to find this copy of Death of a Salesman, and on it, all of the little moments that in it, and what I'll be doing in my book is sort of blowing things up, to show, and doing some kind of a, I want to honor him as a poetic thinker, right? I want to have people rethink who he was.
Which is interesting, because one of the things I guess I was not worried about, but when I heard that someone was going to be using the McLuhan Library, particularly a woman, he's not known for his progressive feminist thinking, and I guess I worry a little bit too that maybe people have passed McLuhan by.
Well, but that's exactly why it's so great, right? Because now, and it's so interesting because it's kind of the opposite of this, right? It's somebody we can reanimate through getting to know who he was. Because he had tons of books on humor, in Yiddish humor, and there's joke books, and he loved puns, as obviously you would think. So, yeah, it's kind of, and I've only, been here 3 days, so I pulled out like 150
pulled out a lot of books.
Because I didn't know, and at first, when I first came here, my first idea before I came here, because I didn't know, is I was reading an article that John had sent me that this woman had written on McLuhan that was fantastic, and she mentioned his secretary is a woman named Margaret Stewart. And she used the phrase that she was one of the maintainers of his archive. And this is not in this archive, it's in the other archive in Ottawa, you can see evidence of her handedness. And I just loved that. And that was going to be my project. And then I got here and realized, and because nobody really knows anything about Margaret Stewart, so that's actually another project that should be done, because he dictated to her. His medium, right, was language, words. So he's dictating what machine are they using. Then she's taking shorthand, she transcribes it. What is the process going back and forth between them of writing and all of those things? But now it's just exploded much more into a project, I guess, a reappreciation of him, or something as simple as that.
But one of the visual elements I think we want to look at too is some of the covers of the
books.
They're
hilarious. These 60s, there's one it's a science fiction novel, and it's called The Pleasure Tube. And it's and it's got these like naked bodies coming out of the television set in purple and all of these. So there's all this sort of psychedelic stuff too, right? And so, and books on television. One of the things, I love television. I'm a television junkie, or whatever we call it. And I don't think he watched it. He was on it. And it's such a different...
Would he have time to read?
Exactly. How could he? Exactly. And for somebody of my generation, that is utterly fascinating. And to see how he picked up everything based on his interest in pre-Gutenberg culture. It's just amazing. And so there's, I've only just begun to uncover, but the covers are also, we found 2 copies, right, of a manual on abortion.
Can I ask you a question that's also a question for the librarians? I am so interested in this project, partly because I like personal libraries, and there are very few places that personal libraries are kept together or regarded as a form of knowledge in and of themselves, especially artist libraries. And it's a huge operation of will to do that. And I just wonder how you think about that. Like when you have an archive like this, obviously McLuhan is a singular figure, and thus the resources and the energy could go to hold it together. But in working on this project, in all of your forms, like how have you come to think about what those kinds of libraries represent as a form of knowledge or possibility as a tool? Because you called it a working library a number of times.
It is, I mean, it's a definitely working library. I mean, it's not a library. We have collections here from, say, like we have a large collection of Alice in Wonderland books here, for example, collected by Joseph Brabant. Brabant was not an Alice scholar, I don't think, in any form. He was just interested in books about Alice in Wonderland. And so, in and of itself, I think looking through that collection, individually the books are quite interesting. As a corpus, they're probably a little less interesting because there's another collection here right above you of Forbes, or the Forbes collection, where he was I think he was a minister in the 17th century, I think.
Nonconformist.
Nonconformist. And his book collection is remarkable, first of all, because the books are not in the greatest shape, so you can tell that he loved them. He loved reading his books. I think when we see the McLuhan books, it's the same way. You know, the Brabant books, the Alice books are much more pristine. They're almost objects of fetish. And yet, when we look at the books of McLuhan or Forbes or any of the people that actually use their books, you know, the spines are broken, you know, and McLuhan's written in them. And I think that we collect a lot of different libraries here, but a lot of the collectors come at it from a different point of view. So I don't know if David wants to.
Well, one way you can see a space like this is a library made up of many libraries, personal, institutional, and imagine if you think a book can help you travel back in time, then you have an opportunity to bring together a library or a collection that can also help you travel back in time, but to that time put together by one person or by an institution or a group. We don't have many opportunities to, we get offers, but we don't have many opportunities to keep many personal libraries together. And when we do, it's a special opportunity for us to preserve someone's legacy in a way that people may not think it's a form of preservation.
Well,
Sorry.
can I just say
Yeah,
one
sure,
thing?
sure.
And to see his thinking, right? You're in there watching him think. And I just want to mention two other writers. One of his favorite writers was Jane Austen. He loved her, and he had several copies of Persuasion, and the copy of Emma is very hard to even hold because it's a paperback and it's very old and it's coming apart, and he extensively, you know, all sorts of, and the other one that was fascinating is Naked Lunch in Burroughs. Oh my God, beautiful. Just, I mean, it's beautiful to see what and John gave me this brilliant review that he wrote of Naked Lunch in 1964. Woo! Like if you're ever going to teach McLuhan or Burroughs, start with that. And his generosity of spirit as he's reading Burroughs is great because obviously he's hardly a queer junkie. He's, you know, you would think that as someone who comes from a very devout Catholic tradition, he's not moralistic. He wants to know what they're doing. He wants to see what Burroughs is saying, and he pulls so much from Naked Lunch, obviously, and other books.
I just wondered if you had any thoughts about sort of the collection of libraries and. Yeah.
I do, but well, it could be a fraught subject because sometimes people will approach a library with a collection of books that they themselves value so much and they put so much work into it, but it doesn't make a jump into a public context where there would be sufficient interest, I guess, from a research perspective. It's a personal collection, not a public one, right?
Right.
And it's rare for a library to be able to make that leap into the public realm and maintain its aura, so to speak. You know, in the case of the McLuhan Library, 5,000 books annotated by Marshall Cluin? No problem. We have John Graves Simcoe's personal library, right?
Just up there, I think.
First colonial governor of Upper Canada. Not that interesting as a library.
No.
It's a gentleman's library. If you're interested in what a gentleman is reading in
Right.
late 1700s, that's a great example.
Do you think
So
they were read too? Can you tell?
They weren't. He wasn't a heavy annotator.
Yeah, exactly.
So if there's, I think there are a couple copies of books that were annotated.
Right.
More relevant to our project has been a collection of books on ornithology that were put together by a curator at the ROM, I think, and a biologist named James Bailey.
Yep.
Bailey collection. Not a collection we typically would take now, but for whatever reason it landed here, I think. And it's been a rich resource for our project because of his focus on ornithology, and specifically ornithology in Ontario.
Right.
And so being able to draw some of the narratives that we've found are directly from that collection. It has greatest hits that are of interest by themselves, so like a copy of John James Audubon's Birds of North America, right? Like, famous book, lovely to have, but the pamphlets, the individual items that he was collecting over the course of his career, that's what makes it fascinating and valuable, right? It's that scope and breadth and that passion and devotion for a particular topic
Right.
that often exceeds the particular person.
Right.
Yeah.
We should probably end the evening here simply because I want people to have a chance to look at the books that we've selected here from our projects. I will remind you there's a sheet that Erica has at the back there that talks about the books themselves, then the books that are coming out of it, and the special collector's edition box set, which would be also on offer. As I said, the books won't be available until the fall, so please watch Public's website for that, watch our website for that. And with that, I think, thank you for coming, thank you for braving the weather. And we hope to have, maybe we'll have another launch, like, when the books come out.
Oh, yeah, we should.
We'll probably have a nice proper launch. Because then we can talk about our, because we're still obviously in the earliest stages of our collaboration, not to scare Erica, who's going to be editing these, but yes, but it'll be wonderful.
That's a long time away.
It's going to be fun. So thanks again for coming.